So far, a picture of the internet consists of a server side, a client side, and what they're communicating back and forth, which is the content, which is wrapped up inextricably with the HTML and the CSS. So we understand that the content is the point of what we're communicating, and the HTML is what gives that content meaning, marks it up to mean one thing or another. We talk about HTML as the nouns of internet languages, and the CSS is what makes it look the way we want. We talk about CSS as the adjectives in terms of internet languages. So when you want to do interactive things, when you want your website to do things, to respond to the user in a way that's more than just following a hyperlink, what you need is JavaScript. You need a script of some kind. JavaScript is the client-side script. So actually, you can have a script on the cloud, in the internet, on the server, and it can do a bunch of cool stuff. But you can also run scripts right on your users' home computers, on their computers, like as on the website while they're using it, without any communication back to the server. So the language we usually use for that is JavaScript, and JavaScript is very powerful for that reason because it doesn't require this constant communication back and forth. If you have scripts on your server, then for the user to interact with it, there has to be that HTTP connection, and you have to say what the user has done, and then the script has a chance to respond, and then they have to make another HTTP connection to give the script's response, and back and forth. So it's not quite as efficient. What's more efficient is if you use your visitor's computer. They use their processor, the script runs on their computer and their computer's memory, and you can get a lot of stuff done interactively right there. Open up your web page in Shift Edit the way we have been doing, and log in and go to actually create a third page. So create a new page, and we'll call it script.html, and then you'll want to probably link to it with your whole site and everything. So you can either do that now or come back to it later. So pause it right now if you want to go ahead and create that script.html file. So I'll give you a chance to pause now. Okay, so you've created a new empty script.html. Go into your head. This is the head element. So remember, the first element is this doc type, then you have the HTML, and then you have head. And within the head, you've got a couple of things, including the title. So usually I'll put it after the title. I'll put this kind of things. And we're going to write a new element. And this HTML element we're going to write is called script. And what this element does is it gives us a space to write our script, our scripting language, which will be JavaScript. So write the script, script, that opening tag and then the closing tag. I use element and tag interchangeably. And then put some space between the opening and the closing tags. And inside there, that's where you're going to write your script. It's going to be JavaScript. It's not going to be HTML. So no HTML goes between this script and stop script. It's all JavaScript, no HTML. Okay. So in here, scripting is very much like math. If you remember back to algebra, there's this concept of a variable. So you have something like x, and x can contain a number. We don't know which number. It can the number that it contains varies. Okay, so you might have a simple equation like 1 + 1 = x. That's an algebraic equation, and you can solve for x to get 2, right? So on the left, you'll add 1 + 1 to get 2, and then you get 2 = x. And you can do more complicated things where the variable is in different places with multiple variables. Well, scripting also uses variables. And so go ahead and write your first variable to start with. You're going to write, you have to declare it as a variable. Using JavaScript, the way to do that is you write var, which stands for variable, and just always do everything lowercase unless I tell you to do something uppercase. Var, V-A-R, space, and by the way, you're writing this inside the script element. Between those script start and close script tags, write var space x. So we're naming this variable x. And then you put an equals symbol and then a 1. So this defines the variable x and sets it equal to 1. Now we can use this. So for example, you can do an alert. Have you ever seen those annoying pop-ups that make a noise on a web page? It's kind of annoying, but for testing, it works pretty well. So we're going to write a JavaScript command to create one of those alerts, and then we can put whatever we want in that little pop-up. So the JavaScript for this is, by the way, put this on a new line, alert, and then open parentheses, close parentheses. So no space after alert, open and close parentheses right after that. Now go back and within those parentheses, write the letter X. So this is the same name as the variable, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to alert that variable. So when you alert the variable, JavaScript will create this little pop-up, but it doesn't just alert the variable name, it actually alerts what the variable is. So save this, and I'll give you a chance to run it and see what happens. So pause. Okay, so hopefully if you're following along, when you saved it and ran this little JavaScript function by loading the page, you got a pop-up that was just the content of that variable 1. So very simple. Now I want to show you something cool here. Instead of putting within the parentheses around that X, instead of just putting the variable name in the parentheses, I want you to put quotes around it. So put a quote around the left and a quote around the right. And now it reads alert, open parentheses, quote, your variable name, which is X, and then another quote, and then the close parentheses. So what do you think is going to happen now? We're no longer alerting the variable name just plain in its own JavaScript syntax. The quotes do something in JavaScript. When you put quotes around something, JavaScript no longer evaluates it as a script, but it evaluates it as something that's like to be taken literally. So it's sort of like if I'm talking to you and I'm describing things and using words, and then suddenly I use quote symbols around a particular word. Well, a lot of people will use that to emphasize a word. But technically, when you put a quote around a word, especially when written, the quotes around that word or around that phrase mean that you're actually quoting something. It's a quote. So it's no longer you saying it, but it's actually something that is being quoted. So it's, when you're listening to a sentence like this or reading a sentence, you don't understand the part that's in quotes as part of the sentence. You understand it as a separate kind of thing. And this is similar with JavaScript. So when it comes across this X now, because it's in quotes, it's not going to look at it as a variable anymore. It's going to look at it as the letter X. In quotes, it's just what we call a string. It is, we call it a string because usually a string consists of multiple letters strung together. So if it was like XYZ, it's like popcorn. Have you ever made those popcorn chains where you put string through popcorn and you got a string of them? Well, the popcorns are like letters in JavaScript strings. And this JavaScript string is actually just one popcorn, the letter X. But the point is it's understanding it as a little string of letters, not as something to be read and understood and parsed as a variable. So put the quotes around it and save it, and pause the video and I'll give you a chance to run it and see what happens. So pause it now. Okay, so if you are doing this in the correct way, you should have got that alert now, but instead of alerting the number 1, it alerted the letter X, which is just a string. So go ahead and you can play with this a little bit and put anything you want in there, and you can write a sentence, you can write a novel. Actually, I think there's a limit to how much you can fit in there, but if you put it in quotes, whatever you put in there, it'll just quote back to you directly. But if you don't put quotes, then the JavaScript program, when it's going through this, will assume that what it's alerting is not just some text, but it's JavaScript to be understood. So if it's a variable, it'll alert the value of that variable. So let's make this a little bit more interactive. The most powerful ability of JavaScript is not just having these variables, but the ability to test the values of these variables and do different things depending on the condition or the state of that variable. So in order to test this, we use this logical language of if, then, else. So if this is true, do this. Else, if this is true, do this. And the way that we'll do this in JavaScript is usually with variables, comparing one variable against another or comparing a variable against a string. So let's go ahead and write this in our code. So we're going to write this between where we declare that variable x and where the alert occurs, because we're going to have this alert conditionally based on what the variable contains. So after var equals x, that line, put a new line and write the word if. Now again, we're going to put parentheses, if, and it's simplest if you just don't put a space, if no space, and then open and close parentheses. And then within these parentheses, we're going to write the test condition. So what we're going to test is we're going to test whether or not x is 1. So when x is 1, we're going to alert one thing, and when x is not 1, we're going to alert something else. So to test this, write x equals 1. So you would expect to just write x equals 1, but you have to think in terms of computers. Computers aren't very good at having one thing mean two different things. So we're already using the equals sign one line above to assign the value x equals 1. That's kind of like in math if we say let x equal 1. And then if we're testing, your natural inclination is going to be like, let's say if x 1 equals sign 1, if x equals 1. But we have to have a different sign to test equality. So we use two equals signs. And you're going to make many mistakes if you're writing a lot of JavaScript or any code where you're going to accidentally put one equals sign when you're testing, and it will assign x to 1. If you do that, it will always be true. So no matter what you put between x and the other side, if you only put one equal sign, it'll be true because you're setting it to true. So don't do that. Put two equal signs and put x equals 1. So we're testing whether or not x is equal to 1. Now, you can put quotes around that 1, but JavaScript is actually very tricky because it's able to look at that 1. If you don't put quotes around it, it understands it as, like I said before, it's JavaScript to be understood. It's not just a string, but it understands it as a number, the number 1. And so when you give a variable, when you assign it to a number, the JavaScript engine understands that the variable contains a number. Now the variable can also contain strings. So note so far, we've given that variable, we've made it equal to 1 without quotes. So because it doesn't have quotes, that's a number. And so below, we can compare it to if x equals 1, the number, it'll test, JavaScript will test, does x, which now contains the number 1, equal the number 1. Now here's something really tricky. If you put quotes around the 1 in this test, it'll be comparing, does x, the number 1, equal the string 1, the character 1. It's a little popcorn on the string, right? And JavaScript is pretty smart. It'll actually say these are the same thing. The string 1 and the number 1 are the same. But it's kind of like this isn't always reliable. You can't rely on JavaScript to always figure out the type of variable it is. So sometimes you'll run into things where it's evaluating things that you think are equal, but JavaScript is not quite advanced enough because they're different variable types. So let's, for the sake of the future, let's go through this and pay attention to the type of variable it is and try to be consistent. So let's not put quotes around that 1. Let's try to keep it as a number. The number we've set the variable is a number. Now let's test a number as well. So don't put quotes around it. Okay, so if x equals 1, what are we going to do? We have to put what happens if that condition is true. And the way we do that, we can't just assume that the rest of the page is like, we have to tell JavaScript where the thing to do is. Like we have to give it some boundaries. Otherwise it's just going to think, if it's true, like from now on forever, I'm always going to do this. But we want to set just like a certain number of things. So it's kind of like in CSS, we use the curly braces again. So right after that closing parentheses, put an open curly brace, and then put a couple of line breaks, hit enter a couple times, and put a closing curly brace. Now, everything between that open curly brace and that closing curly brace will be what we're going to do if x is true. If x equals 1, which means if that condition evaluates to true. So JavaScript will evaluate the condition, the part in the parentheses, and if it evaluates to true, it will execute, it will perform, it'll do what's within those curly braces. So let's copy and paste the alert that we wrote before up into that curly brace area for if x is 1. And let's change it to say, let's make a string. So in quotes, let's write x is 1. And you can write that out. Okay, so I'm going to give you a chance to catch up and do this. So pause the video. Now, if you refresh it, you will see that depending on exactly how you copied, you'll see that because x is 1, it will give you your sentence. And if you deleted that second alert, you won't see anything else. But if you didn't, you'll also see that second alert, because after it got through that true condition, if it keeps going along the script, it continues to execute the script, and it'll come across that next alert. So we want to make an alert that it only happens if x is not 1. So the way to do this is right after that closing curly brace, we're going to write the word else. So if this is true, if this is true, do this, else do this other thing. So we're going to write else, and then we're going to open another curly brace because now we're setting the condition of what to do if it's not true. So else, open curly brace, put a couple of line breaks, close curly brace. Now in here we're going to put what happens if x is not true. If x is not 1, which evaluates to true. So you won't see this while it's true, but let's move that alert up in there, and let's write x is not 1. Okay, so now you should just have two alerts: the one that says x is 1 in the first condition, and then the one that says x is not 1 in the second one. So I'll let you pause it and run it, and then continue when you've done that. Okay, so now if you did it right, you'll see the alert says x is 1, and then you don't see the second alert. You don't see the other alert because that condition is not true. Now, go ahead and change your variable. In your JavaScript, on that first line, we put var x equals 1. Change that 1 to any other number. You can change it to 2, you can change it to 100. You could put a word. However, if you put a word, it has to be in quotes. It has to be a string. Otherwise, JavaScript will think it's another variable name or something, and it'll get confused. So if you're going to put a word, you have to make sure that JavaScript knows it's a string. It's like these characters strung together on the popcorn on the string. Otherwise, JavaScript is going to say you put the word monkey, JavaScript is going to think, oh, it's talking about the variable named monkey, and it's going to look for where you have set a variable named monkey. You've set a variable named x, but you didn't set one named monkey. And also, there are no JavaScript functions or methods or predefined things that are monkey. So like you see how the word var is in there, it's not in quotes. That's something that JavaScript uses. There's if in there, that's a word, and it's not in quotes. That's like one of these JavaScript things. So it's not in quotes. JavaScript's going to think that it needs to do something with it. And if it's not actually something that it can do anything with, it's going to choke. So you can set x equal to a word that you make up or a sentence, but make sure you put it in quotes so it knows it's a string. So go ahead and do that and run it, and I'll pause it and give you a chance to try it. So you should have seen the other alert. So this is very cool. You're starting to see the fundamentals of how JavaScript works. This is basics of programming. What you've done so far up to this scripting lesson is markup and styling. So you've done HTML, which is markup language. It's a markup language. And you've done CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's not really important what it stands for, but it's a styling language. And they have more in common with each other than they do with scripting languages. Now, a script is in a whole other realm. It's closer to like actually what we think of when we talk about programming. So you've really just written your first script, and obviously you can do a lot more with JavaScript. But this was more of just an introduction to front-side, client-side scripting. So JavaScript is the language of choice. By the way, if you're going to be learning how to do web development, in terms of making web pages, that usually means a front-end web developer. Back-end web developers tend to come from more of a computer science background, like programming, and like if you get a programming degree or a computer science degree. Front-end developers are kind of more of probably what you're interested in. So as a front-end developer, the three key things you want to learn are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can't escape using these three languages. So as of now, you've got your introduction to all three, and as you go, you'll run into them and you'll know how to use them, and you can probably pick it up pretty quickly as you go. Just kind of like figure it out as you go, and you can get a lot done. So the other side of scripting is the back end, or the server side. So front-end scripting is JavaScript. The back-end scripting is a lot more complicated because there tends to be a lot of different languages. In fact, you can probably hook up your server to run almost any language you want. And this is because you have complete control over your own server, and it doesn't actually have to be interoperable. In the sense that whatever you're doing on your server, the scripting and all this stuff that happens just on your one computer. And then once it's done, the result that it sends out across the internet, that has to be interoperable. But the programming and choosing and like the churning of the program doesn't actually have to interoperate. It's just the communication that has to interoperate. So you can write back-end scripts in any language you want as long as they can communicate with the standard method like HTTP. But there are some standard ones that get used a lot. And I'm going to introduce you to PHP. PHP is open source and free, and so it tends to get used a lot in a lot of software that is free on the internet and open source on the internet. So for example, WordPress uses PHP, and PHP is a backend language that's it has a lot of flaws, but in some senses, it's very easy to get started with simple things. So we're going to write just a very simple PHP script on the back end, and then we're going to execute it and kind of see how this works. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to write the exact same code as we did in JavaScript, but we're going to write it in PHP. So in order to do this, go into your Shift Edit again and create a new file. And here's the different thing is, you're not going to create an HTML file this time. You're going to create a file called script.php. Okay, this is very important that you give it the extension PHP. Now, if you're using Shift Edit, there's a little option to create a PHP file to begin with. It has PHP already. So go ahead and do that if you want, or just create it and save it as .php. The important thing is you've got this file in your website called scripts.php. Now within this, we're going to write that same script. So the way to create a variable in PHP is not exactly the same because it's a different language. It's not the same as in JavaScript. The way to do it in PHP is to write a $sign and then the name of your variable without a space in between. So we don't actually have to have that declarative var. You can just write $x, and that will create the variable x. So go ahead and write $x equals 1. And then actually much of the code is the same. So the next line you can write if x equals 1. Now what do you have to change in that? You have to make sure that PHP knows that x is a variable, and the way you do that is with that little dollar. So write $x if $x equals 1. And then, same syntax with the parentheses and everything. And then your open and close curly braces. And within there, instead of writing alert, what we're going to do is PHP is not a front-end script, right? So it doesn't have control on the browser in the same way. But what it will do is PHP will create it'll spit out some content. So what we're going to do is we're going to define what content it spits out with this. And so basically it's like we're writing a document that's going to be transmitted across the internet. So go ahead and write the word echo space, and then you can write your string. So instead of the alert, just write echo space, and then in quotes, open, close, close quote, write your string. So x is equal to 1, whatever you want to write. And then follow the syntax again. the close curly brace, else, open curly brace, and then changing the from alert to echo, echo, space, quote. So note there's no parentheses. Again, write X is not 1. And then close quote, no parentheses in PHP, and then the close curly brace. So I'm going to give you a chance to catch up and save that. But before you do that, I just want to talk you through what's about to happen. So you've written the script. It's exactly the same as the JavaScript in a lot of ways. But the JavaScript, how the JavaScript works is you download the file from the internet, script.html, and within that file you have embedded the JavaScript. So that JavaScript on the client's computer, on the client side, on your user's computer, that JavaScript runs on their computer and executes this code, okay? And will create those little pop-ups. So they have this code on their computer. Now with PHP, it's backend, and all backend scripts are like this. It's different. So instead of downloading the script, what actually happens is you make the request for that document, scripts.php, and instead of downloading it, as it did with scripts.html, instead of downloading it, what it does is it executes it on the server without downloading it. So what happens is this script gets run in the server's computer, in its memory, in its processor, up in the cloud. It gets run there. And then the script creates a product, it runs and it creates a file, it creates something, and that's what it sends. So the result of running the script, what gets sent is the result, not the script, but the result of the script. So what this script does is it has that echo statement. That's what it's sending out. So you could think of echo as print. Echo and print mean kind of the same thing. What it's doing is it's creating this little file, which the content of which is everything that you echo. Now, obviously, I'm simplifying a lot, but what this script is actually doing, that's all it's doing. So when you save this, I want you to go ahead and copy this out, save it, and then run it in your browser. Your domain name / script.php. And I want you to be aware that what's happening is you're not downloading the script. You're downloading the output of the script. Okay, so go ahead and do that and run it. So hopefully this was a pretty seamless experience for you. You go over to your domain, and instead of script.html, you give it the file name that you had here. I named it script.php. You may, if you didn't, it's probably untitled.php. But go ahead and put that domain in, that URL in, I mean. And you see the output of the script. Now note that this is not the script itself. So if you view the source is, you don't see any script in here. You don't actually see the source because it's not downloading the source. It's just showing you the output. So this is the end of the in-class project. You have now completed both a front-end and a back-end script. So you are a front-end and back-end script master. And for the project, we will go ahead and write some scripts with a little bit more interactivity and interact with the user and do something more useful.